now. Is there who comes to power? What you are seeing in U.S. foreign policy, and we've seen it now on a number of occasions. Just take, for example, President Trump weighing in militarily with Iran last year. What you're seeing is the Trump administration use U.S. power, but from a distance, a long arm of U.S. force, not put boots on the ground. And of course, that's not surprising because the American people are not in favor of U.S. boots on the ground. So once again, we will be asking the question, and Richard described it very well. Once again, we'll be asking the question, what is possible with air power and with naval power, but without the boots on the ground, without the army, without actually taking power, and what is the plan in Venezuela? That is, I think, something that we'll need an answer to that. We'll need an answer to that in terms of what the Trump administration's thinking is in the coming days.
Keir Simmons is our chief international correspondent. He's joining us on the air right now again as we get a better understanding of the situation on the ground in Caracas, Venezuela, in that country after the president announced the large-scale strikes that have taken place, that the U.S. has captured and flown Nicolas Maduro and his wife out of the country. That capture, Keir, gives us a better understanding of what we were first reporting over the course of the last several hours, that low-flying helicopters were spotted there, not just fiery explosions, but low-flying helicopters in that region as well, which would be required for excuse me, an operation of this kind where the U.S. wasn't just striking, but it was, in effect, a capture operation where they were picking up Nicolas Maduro, the leader of that country. We are hearing from a variety of individuals now beginning to wake up on the East Coast in the United States. Among them, Mike Lee. He is the senator from Utah, has been outspoken in his criticism of the president's efforts around the world, but most notably recently in Venezuela. The Republican for Utah posting within the last hour, "I look forward to learning what, if anything, might constitutionally justify this action in the absence of a declaration of war or authorization for the use of military force." That's where lawmakers will go in terms of this conversation in the days and weeks ahead. But in the immediate hours following this, Keir, the real focus obviously is on what happens in Venezuela itself. What are the next steps, the plans to follow up these strikes that we have witnessed take place over the course of these pre-dawn hours in Venezuela?
That's right, and I think another question is where is Maduro? Where has he been? Where has he gone? Clearly, there are places that are sympathetic to Venezuela that are close. It could be that if he's been, though, evacuated, if you like, if he's been taken by U.S. forces, as you describe, and that looks very likely, then you would have to potentially look to countries that have a relationship with the U.S. And would be prepared to take him, if you like. There is the question of again of Russia and President Putin. Russia is closely is a close partner of Venezuela, the Maduro regime. So again, that's a possible place to look. But there are many possibilities of where he is, and of course, one aspect of this is that in terms of the way that you would want. The way that you would plan this, if you were the Trump administration, is you wouldn't want to hear from Maduro in the coming days, while the country itself, as you describe, is figuring out, kinetically, frankly, figuring out what happens next. And again, we simply don't know. So what happens in the coming hours will be out of control a little bit. Until we know whether or not there is actually some kind of a strategy beyond removing Maduro.
NBC's chief international correspondent is Keir Simmons. He's been joining us with more details about the situation that is taking place on the ground here. And Keir, as you were describing, this is significant for a variety of reasons, not just obviously for what it does in terms of the leadership of that country, but the sort of impact it has globally as it relates to the economy and beyond oil. One of the Venezuela. One of, if not the largest producer of oil in the world, the U.S. in recent weeks, we have witnessed has been targeting, seizing at least one and a series of other oil tankers in that region with sanctioned oil that the U.S. had been focused on. The president has also been heavily focused on targeting drug trafficking from that country, accusing Venezuela of bringing fentanyl to the United States. In fact, our Latin American expert a short time ago saying that that's not true. Fentanyl does not come from Venezuela to the U.S. They are, though, largely engaged in providing other drugs like cocaine, which most often, according to our experts, goes overseas to Europe right now. But the point you make is a good one, Keir, specifically about what happens to Nicolas Maduro. Where is he now? And then what happens on the ground in the country that he has now just left from? And beyond that, what happens to the U.S., the massive armada, in the president's words, those 15,000 troops off the coast there? Of course, there is only so much the United States can do from a distance, but Maduro did not work alone. He had a hierarchy within his government of others who have been posting statements, even as we speak, over the course of the last several hours in defiance of the actions taking place, even before we knew that Maduro had been captured and taken out. The Venezuelan government posting a short time ago that this was an extremely serious military act of aggression, condemning the United States actions here. I want, if we can, to bring back into this conversation NBC's Gabe Gutierrez, our senior White House correspondent. Oh, sorry, Gabe's not with us for the moment, as we give him a chance to speak to his sources there. So let's get to Richard Engel then, if we can, for a second. And Richard, we've been talking over the course of the early hours of this morning. It is the latest effort by the president of the United States, who sort of came to power in the United States with a desire to focus on domestic issues, to pull the U.S. out of wars. And in fact, we've seen him strike Iran, Iraq, Nigeria, Somalia, and the most recent strike, the Caribbean, Pacific, the most recent strike in Venezuela. And this one is unique, unlike any of the others, in effect, because it removes that country's leader from power and does create this vacuum. One, of course, the U.S. is hoping to fill with a more stable, more democratic-minded government.
Peter, extraordinary day. The U.S., President Trump, carried out a regime change operation overnight in Venezuela. On one of the first days of the year, this is how we are beginning. We are now in somewhat uncharted territory. We don't know who is going to take over. It seems fairly clear that Trump custody. I would assume that right now they are in a controlled location, potentially a warship or some other third country, but heading to the United States. Charges have been prepared against them. And this is sending a message all over the world that President Trump wants to dominate this region, that he wants his threats to be taken seriously. He said that Nicolas Maduro's days were numbered. And apparently now we know what that number was, because it seems, according to President Trump, is no longer in power and has been arrested in an operation, the kind of operation that we've seen been carried out in the past by Navy SEALs, Delta Force, the CIA. Before you reset at the top of the hour, I briefly mentioned oil. You talked about how Venezuela produces a great amount of oil. The real potential for Venezuela is, however, their oil reserves, particularly a kind of heavy oil that the U.S. industrial base is very dependent on. And Venezuela has the largest known oil reserves in the world. So this is a very fundamental part of the calculation. President Trump has talked about the oil. He's talked about his biggest criticism with removing Saddam Hussein was that the United States never got the oil. So clearly, President Trump wanted regime change, wanted Maduro gone. He wasn't leaving. Now he's been arrested, and this administration will want another more U.S.-friendly government that can work out oil deals with the United States. Now, whether that reality happens is the open question. Will there be civil war? Will there be factions of the military that try and fight against a new leadership? How does this next period develop? Is maybe one of the most critical that we've seen in Latin America in many decades, because removing a dictator is one thing, and the U.S. did that overnight with precision and with a military display, attacking numerous military targets, witnesses describing helicopters. So a special operations type mission took place. But now, what about the stabilization? What about the new transition? And if I can go back, Keir Simmons, who was with us a moment ago. Now, Keir, you've interviewed Vladimir Putin. You know Russia well. The U.S. President Trump just asserted his authority in Latin America. You talked about how we're going to watch for Vladimir Putin's response. Do you think Putin and President Xi of China will see what President Trump did and think that they now can do what they want in their sphere of influences? Does this undercut President Trump's claim that Vladimir Putin should never have invaded Ukraine when he goes into foreign countries and arrests their leaders? Does this support China's claim that it can go into Taiwan at a time and place of its choosing and change that government? How do you think China and Russia will see this, and do you think it will encourage them to take more action, direct action, regime change level action in their own neighborhoods?
Keir, do you hear us? Richard will let
I'm not sure if
he may not hear us at the moment.
Out. I think he wasn't here.
He hears you now. Keir, go ahead.
Richard, can you hear me?
We hear you, Keir. Go ahead.
I can hear you now. Yes, you left us waiting. You built suspense.
Yeah, listen, I was saying that I think you posed the question well, Richard, and one of the questions in all of this is, does this indicate to other powers around the world in what is rapidly becoming what experts describe as a multipolar world? Does this indicate to other powers around the world that it is okay to use your power to intervene in neighboring regions, in other countries where you feel you have an interest, even a vital interest? Now, of course, we've already seen Russia do that in Ukraine, so it's not as if other countries have been waiting for permission from the United States in many ways, and China, as you rightly point out, has a policy of reunification with Taiwan at some point in the future. I should say that the Chinese policy is that it hopes that happens peacefully. But what I think this does do too, it's another piece of this, is it further pushes those powers towards the idea of influencing your own neighborhood. And this strike by the Trump administration in Venezuela comes just weeks after it issued its national security strategy, in which it specifically talked about, that strategy specifically talked about U.S. influence in the Western Hemisphere. It even, and Richard, you will know this well, it even referenced a U.S. policy from the 19th century called the Monroe Doctrine, which was a policy that the U.S. had a right to take action and influence particularly countries in its region. And that was mentioned in the national security strategy as a policy of the United States. Now, let's just frame this in terms that the Trump administration would view it, and that is this. The Trump administration might say, actually, it is in America's vital interests to ensure that there is a different, that it lives in a region that is not a threat to it, and which is able to, and that it lives in a region that as far as possible is stable and democratic. Of course, whether or not strikes like these lead to stability is a point that you've been making, Richard, and it's an important one. But the Trump administration might say that drugs trafficking is a threat to it, and it has used that as a justification for the strikes on boats that we've seen in recent weeks. And it might say that Venezuela, with its close relationship with Russia, with its close relationship with Iran, with its relationship with China, that is not something that's acceptable for the United States, so close to the U.S. mainland. So this idea of the Monroe Doctrine has many facets, and it has a logic to it. But again, one of the issues here will be, Richard, whether or not, and this is something that people will be talking about in the days to come, weeks to come, frankly, given how significant this is in the months to come, whether or not this is something that is going to lead to a more stable region. Very often the United States has intervened in this manner in countries and not managed to bring about a more democratic, stable neighbor. So these are all issues that I think will be grappled with as we look ahead. And again, we simply don't know at this stage what the next coming days are going to be like in Venezuela and what is going to emerge from all of this.
Richard Keir, we appreciate both of you. I want you gentlemen to stay with us for a second. Just want to update you with some other information we've been receiving as we've been having these conversations right now. The president posting his statement a short time ago that Maduro has been captured, that he and his wife have been flown out of the country. We are hearing from a Deputy Secretary of State. We do know that the Secretary of State himself, Marco Rubio, was with the president yesterday at his Mar-a-Lago property, Marco Rubio there. But this is from Christopher Landau, one of his deputies, who said a new dawn for Venezuela, referring to Maduro. He said the tyrant is gone. He will now finally face justice for his crimes. We are out to the Justice Department for any better indications. As the president said, the operation was done in conjunction with U.S. law enforcement. For any better details about where Maduro is being taken, whether he will face charges here in the United States, and in effect what that would look like. We should note that in March of 2020, in the waning months of President Trump's first term, the U.S. did, among other things, say that it was imposing filing charges against Nicolas Maduro. In effect, in absentia at the time, the Justice Department at the time saying that Maduro and other high-ranking Venezuelan officials were being charged with narco-terrorism, corruption, drug trafficking, and other criminal charges. Another administration the Biden administration had come to power here in the United States in the time between that. And so the question is what, in effect, it would look like, whether we would see Nicolas Maduro in a court of law in some form in the United States. But Richard and Keir and Gabe Gutierrez, our senior White House correspondent, who are all with us right now, I want to focus on what's been happening in the last few hours while folks have been waking up across the U.S. as, again, we see on a loop now this video of fiery explosions throughout the capital city of Caracas there. We wait to get better details on exactly what the targets were. We have spoken about helicopters flying, hovering and flying just above the buildings, above the ground there. Clearly, they would have been necessary for any operation of this kind to sweep up to capture Nicolas Maduro. We are waiting for better understanding if this was a negotiated handover, in effect, if Maduro had spoken in some form of private negotiation with the U.S., promising to give himself up, or if he was seized, the president says captured, which would indicate it was against his will. But this is a very dramatic situation to take place. Before, we said it was a dramatic escalation of an effort by the U.S. to crack down on Nicolas Maduro. That escalation has now reached its conclusion, which is the departure of Nicolas Maduro. Gabe, talk to us, if you can, our senior White House correspondent, Gabe Gutierrez, about how we have been building to this moment under President Trump, who, you know, a matter of months ago in October said, among other things, to use his language, he used an expletive, don't F with the United States, was the warning he gave to Nicolas Maduro, more recently saying that his days could be numbered.
Yeah, that's right, Peter. Very strong words from President Trump throughout his entire second administration. And as you alluded to, throughout his first administration, it was in January of 2019 that the U.S. formally recognized Juan Guaido as the opposition leader. That opposition fizzled during his first administration. You mentioned the charges that the DOJ brought against Maduro and several top aides back in 2020. But really, during this administration and under Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who also happens to be the National Security Advisor, the Trump administration has really zeroed in on Nicolas Maduro and Venezuela. Now, there had been early on in this administration some negotiations with the Maduro government. Rick Grenell, an envoy to Venezuela, there was even some cooperation with Venezuela accepting some migrant flights and even having an exchange, releasing some prisoners to the U.S. That was months ago. That seems like an eternity away, because really over the last 6 months especially, the Secretary of State and top Trump administration officials, including Stephen Miller, who you mentioned, by the way, Peter, Stephen Miller at Mar-a-Lago last night, Secretary
Correct.
of State Marco Rubio at Mar-a-Lago last night. They really have been ramping up the pressure over the last few months. We have been speaking ad nauseum about the increased military presence in the Caribbean. So many questions about what that was building towards, and it now seems to be that all along, or at least very recently, things have escalated so much that they were able to make the decision to go in and, in the president's words, capture Nicolas Maduro. We're expecting to hear more from the president later on this morning, 11 o'clock. He says he will speak to the press and perhaps answer some of these questions, chief among them, where will Nicolas Maduro be taken? What becomes of that $50 million reward for information leading to his arrest that the FBI had increased just several months ago? But you're right, Peter. President Trump had been saying that Nicolas Maduro's days were numbered. His administration had given conflicting messages on the purpose of those airstrikes on those alleged drug boats. Was it to combat drugs coming into the U.S.? Was it to rattle Nicolas Maduro and try to force him from power? Chief of Staff Susie Wiles, in a recent interview, said it was to make Maduro cry uncle. Well, not sure if he cried uncle or whether this was some negotiated exit, but according to the president, the end result of this is Nicolas Maduro is out of Venezuela. Staggering headline, historic news for that country. And now we will see how this plays out. Already, the statements of condemnation from neighboring countries. Colombia's president outraged by this. Cuba's president as well, of course, with its significant ties to Venezuela's government. And, Peter, by the way, when we first heard about these explosions, and just a few hours ago, around 2 o'clock local Caracas time, we did get a statement from the Venezuelan government just a short time after that. It was an initial statement, unclear. It was not signed by Nicolas Maduro, obviously. There were questions about his whereabouts. We now know, according to the president, that he was captured. Who is leading Venezuela right now? We don't know the answer to that question. And as you've been speaking with Richard and Keir and our other analysts, a major question will be, does this turn into a power vacuum? Does the U.S. support the opposition leader and somehow, does she come into power, or is there some sort of fighting in between different factions of Venezuela's government, the military? So many unanswered questions right now that we hope to learn more from the president himself in just a few hours this morning, Peter.
Gabe Gutierrez is our senior White House correspondent. He has been traveling with the president over much of this holiday break, has been a short distance from Mar-a-Lago, watching as the president has met with some of his top advisors and aides, celebrating some of the holidays, also likely meeting privately about some of the situations that we are witnessing now taking place overseas. Again, as we look at these pictures from earlier this morning, again before dawn, and as it approaches 6:30 in the morning in Venezuela, it's certain that dawn will break soon, and that country will wake up to a new dawn, a country for the first time and in a long period that is governed. It's not clear by whom, certainly not governed by its former president, Nicolas Maduro, who the president of the United States, Donald Trump, a short time ago announced has been captured by the U.S. and has been taken out of this country. We're going to take a brief moment right now to reset. Stay with us for this live coverage.
This is an NBC News special report.
Good day to you. I'm Peter Alexander here in New York with a dramatic developing situation taking place on the ground in Caracas, Venezuela. We have been watching the situation develop over the course of the last several hours, bringing you live coverage after a large scale strike on the ground there with fiery explosions seen throughout the city. And then from the president, we heard only a short time ago, President Trump on Truth Social posting the following in a stunning and dramatic development, saying the United States of America has successfully carried out a large-scale strike against Venezuela and its leader, President Nicolas Maduro, who President Trump says has been, along with his wife, captured. He says he has been captured and flown out of the country. This operation was done, the president says, in conjunction with U.S. law enforcement. He says details to follow, announcing a news conference to take place at 11 o'clock this morning, roughly 5.5 hours from now at his Mar-a-Lago estate. Right now, you are looking at a live picture. Well, there is the president's post on social media. But let's show you again that live picture on the ground of a more calm, at least from the sky, situation in Venezuela. Now dawn breaking above the capital city there, and it is a new dawn for that country without Maduro, who the U.S. had accused for months of being an illegitimate leader, saying that he was the head of a narco-terrorist regime. He is no longer in power. Real questions right now about who is governing that country. Will it take one of two different forks in the road? Will it be a country that is governed by a new Democratic-led government, or will it be one that continues to follow the path of Nicolas Maduro? We have a series of questions that have yet to be answered. We have reached out to those at the White House, the Pentagon, and State Department for some answers to those questions, including where is Nicolas Maduro right now? Where is he being taken? Will he face justice, as it were, in a U.S. court of law in the United States? Was this a negotiated exit? We do not know about that just yet as well. Maduro, only a matter of days ago, had told a Spanish journalist that he was open to conversations with the United States. The president himself has said publicly that the focus has been on ending the illegal flow of drugs from Venezuela into the U.S. The president says it's fentanyl. Experts in that region say most often Venezuela is responsible for the flow of cocaine, notably to Europe, but some of it gets to the United States, of course, as well. We are also trying to get new details about the operation that has taken place on the ground. But as we look at some of the video from earlier in the distance, you can see some of the glowing lights, the fiery explosions that had taken place. We know that there were low-flying helicopters reported by eyewitnesses on the ground as well that likely would have been needed to be a part of any operation of this kind. Not a kill operation like the one involving Osama bin Laden more than a decade ago. This, a capture operation that ultimately picked up Nicolas Maduro. We are joined by some of our best in the business, our colleagues, Richard Engel, Courtney Kuby at the Pentagon, our chief international correspondent, Keir Simmons, and Gabe Gutierrez, who covers the White House with me as well. Let's begin with Richard Engel, if we can, for a moment. Richard, I just want to reset the situation, get your reaction to the headline this morning. As you and I were on the air, as I read that post out loud, both of us were stunned by the announcement that Maduro had been captured and taken out of the country.
So the first indication we got that something dramatic had happened was several hours ago. We've been on air for several hours now, Peter, when we heard these vague reports, still unconfirmed, of explosions in Caracas and in potential other areas. And then a key detail emerged: helicopters. Witnesses described helicopters on the ground, hovering, sounds of aircraft, explosions in multiple locations. As soon as you start hearing helicopters hovering, you get an indication that this is an extraction operation. You obviously can't land fixed-winged aircraft in the middle of a city. But who was the target? What happened? Who was carrying it out? And then a short while we were discussing all of these scenarios, President Trump himself, and by no accident, President Trump himself, the Pentagon has been silent. So up until now, this is something of a pattern where major announcements are made by President Trump personally on Truth Social. President Trump announced that it was Nicolas Maduro and his wife who had been captured, and that they will face justice. And thank you for your attention to this matter.
Richard,
the question that everyone is asking right now is, did the United States, did President Trump just carry out a successful regime change? Because regime change has just happened. And will this open the door to a democratic opposition, better economic relations, a weakening of an alliance backed by Cuban intelligence all across the region, a new Latin America where the U.S. has a much stronger hand? Or did tonight President Trump just send Venezuela into uncertain territory for sure, but civil war and a power struggle that the United States will have to either watch from afar or be drawn in to try and contain?
Richard, I apologize for my interruption. I only want to share some new information that I received while you were speaking there. This is coming from the Republican Senator of Utah, Mike Lee, who had spoken only a matter of hours ago, as we shared during our live coverage, criticizing this asking how and what constitutional act was taking place where the Congress had not been notified of this. Mike Lee has now posted a new statement where he says he just spoke to the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. He says that Rubio informed him that Nicolas Maduro has been arrested by U.S. personnel to stand trial on criminal charges in the United States, and that the kinetic action, the strikes that we saw tonight in effect, was deployed to protect and defend those executing the arrest warrants. So that this was the primary mission, the strikes, in the words of Mike Lee, detailing what he was told by the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, that those strikes were basically to help protect those who were executing this arrest warrant. This action, Lee adds, likely falls within the president's inherent authority under Article 2 of the Constitution to protect U.S. personnel from an actual or imminent attack. Now, the lawmakers will, of course, fight over the circumstances behind this, how this is being conducted, but let's focus again on what we know is happening right now with our senior national security correspondent, Courtney Kuby, who is up early as we begin this new year together. Courtney, again, the major headline there, the capture of Nicolas Maduro and the successful carrying out of this large-scale strike against Venezuela. What are your sources telling you? Do we have any better understanding of who would have been behind this effort? Obviously, it requires some of the special forces type units to be able to accomplish a mission of this kind.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we need to keep in mind here, Peter, is the U.S. military, when it's come to some of these recent actions in the region, so specifically the interdictions of these oil tankers, the military has been in support of law enforcement here. Based off of the way the president posted this on Truth Social, his own social media platform, of course, that he started, based on the way that he wrote about this, it does appear that this was law enforcement that was in the lead here. We're still trying to get more information about that. The U.S. military, though, it appears was involved in sort of shaping the locations so that the law enforcement and potentially other U.S. agencies would be able to go in.
Sorry, Courtney, please continue.
Would be able to go in and sort of clear the space so that they could go in and then arrest Nicolas Maduro and his wife, or take them into custody. So the kinds of things that we are seeing from social media video, as we know, we've seen the statement from the president, but that's really all the detail that we're getting. The video does appear to show transport helicopters, Chinooks, but there also appear to be some smaller helicopters there. Now, we don't know what those are. But we do know what is in the region right now. There is a very elite Air Force unit known as the 160th Special Operations. You may have heard of them because they were involved in taking the Navy SEALs into bin Laden's compound in May of 2011. They have assets there, including Little Birds, so these tiny little helicopters that move very fast, fly low to the ground. So we know that those sorts of assets are in the area that could have been used here. But I also found it very interesting that President Trump didn't specifically refer to the strikes that occurred as sort of the shaping operations in advance of the U.S. personnel going in on the ground there. He didn't necessarily refer to those as airstrikes. And remember some other assets the U.S. has built up. Remember, over the last couple of months, the military has flooded that region with a ton of air power and power at sea. Power at sea is the key here. They have a number of different ships who have the ability to launch Tomahawks, TLAMs. Those are very precise missiles. We have seen the U.S. military launch them in recent years in many different cases, so many cases, Libya, Syria, other times, where they need to hit a specific target and they need what's known as standoff capability. So essentially they want to be free or safe from any kind of air defenses or other systems in the area that they are trying to target. So at this point, it's not clear exactly what the Venezuelan military may have done in response to any of this. We have not seen any indication that there was any kind of immediate response when the aircraft were going or when these strikes were occurring. But remember another thing that the military has been doing in recent weeks and months now, and that is flying missions close to the airspace that would become Venezuelan airspace. So right up to the border of international airspace, international waters, right up to the border of Venezuela. A lot of times the military will do that for a reason. It's not just testing routes. It's not just seeing what they can see. It's trying to figure out exactly what the air defense is in a place, how they respond to an aircraft. So it's known as painting an aircraft. Does the air defenses that are potentially lined up along the border there of Venezuela, are they latching onto U.S. military aircraft when they fly up close to Venezuelan airspace? This would give the military, over the course of the last several weeks, when we have seen them do this time and time again, even with things like long-range bombers, are the Venezuelan air defenses painting those aircraft? How quickly do they respond? This gives the military, the U.S. military, essentially a pattern of life of how the Venezuelan military would respond to aircraft flying in. So all of these things that we have seen occur over the last several weeks and months with the military, the buildup, the exercises, the routines that they have been flying, what they have been doing, it appears that it's all been building up to this, Peter. But the big question that we still don't have a good answer to is, beyond the strikes and beyond what appears to be providing a lift to law enforcement and other U.S. officials as part of this picking up Maduro and his wife, what other component, what other part did the U.S. military play? And so we just don't have an answer to that at this point, Peter.
Courtney Kuby covers the Pentagon for us right now. I want to share some other information while you, Courtney, have been speaking. Again, as we're monitoring the situation there, as we try to get a better understanding of Nicolas Maduro's whereabouts and the evolving situation there. The New York Times posting a short time ago that it has spoken to President Trump early this morning, where in its words, it celebrated the success of the mission to capture the Venezuelan president. They quote President Trump saying, "A lot of good planning and a lot of great troops and great people," he said. He said it was a brilliant operation, actually. The Times asked him if he had sought congressional authority for the operation or what is next for Venezuela. And when asked that question, the president said he would address those matters during a news conference to take place at Mar-a-Lago this morning, his private club there in Florida. The president announcing earlier that would take place at roughly 11 a.m. Eastern time. We should also tell you that Venezuela's vice president there has spoken on state-run television after the president's post this morning saying that Nicolas Maduro's location was unknown and that she was asking President Trump for proof of life. Again, it raises real questions about the governance of that country in this time with what the president describes as a massive armada of 15,000 American troops, forces off the coast of that country. I want to bring in now the NBC News military analyst, the Colonel Steve Warren, who is joining us this morning. Colonel Warren, Happy New Year. We are off to the races as we begin this new year again. The president wasting no time at the start of the year in his pressure campaign against Nicolas Maduro, ultimately, as he said this morning, capturing him and his wife, taking them out of the country. Unclear if this was a negotiated exit, but as the Republican Senator Mike Lee said, the strikes that we saw early this morning were done in effect to protect the executing of that arrest warrant, the effort by those forces to pick him up. I know you haven't been involved, obviously, in what's taking place there, but give us a sense about how something like this would be conducted, how challenging it is, and what considerations would have gone into place in advance of a dramatic capture operation like this.
Peter, often our more elite, what we call the Tier 1, so this is our most elite special forces, often our Tier 1 special forces will operate in conjunction with many other agencies throughout the government, whether it's the CIA, as we may likely have seen in that initial potential ground strike, that first ground strike we saw several days ago, or often law enforcement agencies. It is not uncommon for the Tier 1 special operators to work with law enforcement agencies. Particularly, we did this, I think, fairly regularly during the Iraq-Afghanistan conflict. So our special forces operations and our more elite law enforcement operators are familiar with working with each other. Now, as far as how an operation like this comes together, it's an extraordinary and complicated thing to do, and real praise to our soldiers and sailors and law enforcement officials who were able to pull this off. So far, we haven't received any reports of U.S. casualties, which is an extraordinary thing, and we're really proud of our men and women who executed it. But it takes there's sort of several layers, and Courtney Kube referenced it a little bit just moments ago. Initially, you have to ensure that you have the ability to get our aircraft into the target area without being shot down. So we have to execute what we call the suppression of enemy air defenses. So that could be some of the early explosions that we saw, as Courtney mentioned. As our correspondent Courtney Kube mentioned, possibly the use of Tomahawks or other remote capabilities to damage or destroy air defense radars and air defense launchers, right? So that's the initial execution. The next thing we like to try and do is isolate. So once we've suppressed air defense, we then try to isolate the target area. In this case, apparently we somehow knew where Nicolas Maduro and his wife were. It's unclear whether that was because we had spoken with them. We don't know how we knew this, but somehow we knew where Maduro may well have been, and we isolated that area. That can be done, again, through remote capabilities, or it could be done with actual troops on the ground to provide what we call security. And then finally, special forces operators, along most likely with some sort of federal law enforcement, whether it's a marshal or FBI. At this point, we don't know. But after suppression of air defense, isolation of the objective area, finally, we move in and arrest the individual that we're looking for.
Colonel Warren, I want to get a better understanding, of this. Obviously, it would require some troops to touch the ground to be able to pick up Nicolas Maduro in the first place here. Obviously, 15,000 troops is not enough to secure a country like that. The president has made no indication that ground troops will be going into Venezuela in any meaningful way right now. But what sort of a challenge does this pose for the United States? This ultimately becomes less a military one, but more a diplomatic one to try to allow that country to take the preferred fork in the road, not to return to a sort of authoritarian type regime or leader, but to focus on a more democratic led government right now. Ultimately, these are the early steps that you watch militarily, and then there are other real challenges that begin.
Some would say that these steps that we've done up until now, frankly, are the easy steps, right? We have exceptional special operators, exceptional law enforcement operators who understand how to do these types of missions, but they happen at the speed of violence very, very quickly. A lot of planning obviously went into it, but the execution happens very, very quickly. Now comes what in some people's opinions would be the very, very hard part. And we've seen this before. We saw this in Afghanistan beginning in, after 9/11. We saw this in Iraq. When a regime is toppled, when a regime changes suddenly, there's a vacuum. Now there's a little bit of a vacuum. Who's in charge? Who's running the country? We don't know this. Neither does anyone in Venezuela, it would appear, know this. So there are, of course, as in any country, there are opposing forces. There are different forces who want to be in power. Where is the military internally going to fall on this? Where are the other power centers in Venezuela going to fall on this? Where are the other legitimate and somewhat powerful drug cartels who are operating in that country, as we've talked about, as the president has talked about? Those cartels are still functioning. We've struck some of their boats. But that's about it. So these cartels are still there. They're still strong. They're still functioning. The military, we have not, unlike what we did in Afghanistan or what we did in Iraq, we have not, frankly, inflicted any significant damage on the Venezuelan military. So what are they going to do now is certainly a question, I think, on everyone's mind.
Colonel Steve Warren is an NBC News military analyst. Colonel Warren, we appreciate your expertise in helping us better understand the situation that's still evolving on the ground there in Caracas, Venezuela. As again, hopefully we can put up another picture to show our viewers the situation there. It's a new day, a new dawn in many ways, and it's one that begins without the longtime president of that country, the authoritarian leader Nicolas Maduro, who's now been captured and taken out of the country alongside his wife, according to the president, by U.S. forces. I want to get to our chief foreign correspondent again, Richard Engel, who's been watching this news developing right now. Richard, among the questions that the president will surely be asked at a news conference to take place about 5 hours from now at Mar-a-Lago is whether he had any conversations with Maduro in recent days. Maduro told a Spanish journalist only a couple of days ago that he was open to, in effect, discussions, conversations, perhaps even negotiations with the United States. We wait for those answers. We wait to learn where Maduro is right now. But it also raises real questions about what happens next in that country and what it does in terms of the president's desire to sort of crack down on that narco-terrorist state, with so much of the regime still, as evidenced by the public statements coming out of the country, remaining in effect, whether in power, certainly in its positions, though it's unclear who really is in power there.
This is a regime change operation. The government has been decapitated. There clearly was a degree of coordination, unclear with Maduro himself. Not full coordination with Maduro himself. If he wanted to, he could have fled the country. He could have gone to a friendly country. He has some good personal relations with the president of Turkey. He has decent relations with Russia. He's had good relations with Cuba or even Colombia. There are places where if he had wanted to go, he could have gone. So this clearly wasn't a surrender. This was a capture. And as we talked about earlier, this helicopter extraction was supported by a military operation, whether it was tomahawks or airstrikes or a combination